quite a senior and respected person from Trichy Thanjavur belt. Dr. Krishnan was an old student of the same institution where I did my DM, Chitra Tirunal Institute at Trivandrum. And he was one of the oldest student of that college.
In fact, instantly he is the first cardiologist of Trichy as well.
Correct. Yeah. Actually, he was, I think, the second batch of Chitra DM course.
Yes, sir.
Quite a senior person. And
generally, he is very prompt on attendance. Today, probably he has family commitments, I believe.
okay.
Otherwise, usually he used to attend very.
Yeah.
Sir,
Murugesan sir. How are you, sir? I'm able to see Dr. Murugesan sir, but I think he's not hearing me.
Sir, Murugesan sir.
How are you, Arvind Kumar?
Sir, good evening, sir. I am fine, sir. Sir, Shivakumar sir wants to talk to you, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, how are you, sir?
I'm fine, Shivakumar. How are you?
நல்லா இருக்கேன்.
பேஷண்ட் நல்லா இருக்கு பாரு. ரீசெண்டா ASD க்ளோஸ் பண்ணி வந்துச்சது.
ஓகே.
ஆனா ஒரு சிவகுமார் ஒரு லெட்டர் கூட கொடுக்க மாட்டேங்கிறீங்க நீங்க ஏன்?
சாரி சார். ஆக்சுவலா நான் வந்து ஒரு ரூபான்னு ஒரு செக்ரட்டரி வச்சுன்னு ஒரு தடவையும் பர்டிகுலரா சொல்லுவேன். அவங்க வந்து பேஷண்ட் போன பிறகு சாயங்காலம் டைப் பண்ணி 5 மணிக்கு என்கிட்ட சைன் வாங்குவாங்க. ஒரு தடவை மிஸ் ஆயிடுது. I will instruct her to, like Monday itself.
அவங்க பேஷண்டோட அப்பா ஒரு திருக்குறள் புக்கு கொண்டு வந்து பிரசன்ட் பண்ணிட்டு, சார் நல்லா கவனிச்சுட்டாங்க சார், நல்லா பண்ணாங்க சார்னு சொல்லிட்டு போனாரு.
அமுதா எப்படி சார் இருக்காங்க?
நல்லா இருக்கு சுகுமார், நல்லா இருக்காங்க. என்ன பால்னஸ் அதிகமாயிட்டே போயிட்டு இருக்கு. அறிவு அதிகமாக பால்னஸ் அதிகமாக போல இருக்கு.
வயசாயிடுச்சு சார். நானும் உங்க கிளியரா உங்க லீக்குள்ள வந்துட்டேன்.
என்ன 50 இருக்குமா சுகுமார்?
52 ஆயிட்டே இருக்கு சார். தஞ்சாவூர்ல எப்படி சார் பிராக்டிஸ் எல்லாம் கொஞ்சம் கொஞ்சமா அந்த கோவிட் முடிஞ்சு ரெகுலரைஸ் ஆயிட்டு
மார்னிங் மட்டும் போயிட்டு இருக்கான். மணிராம் கிருஷ்ணா மாதிரி ஆளுங்க வந்த உடனே எல்லாம் அங்க போக அனுப்பிச்சு விட்டுறது நாங்கெல்லாம்.
ஜெனரேஷன் 2 இஸ் டேக்கிங் ஓவர் இல்ல சார்?
ஆமா, பழையன கழிதலும் புதியன புகுதலும் தான்.
Economy of the patients are also significantly low, that people are finding it difficult to come to hospitals and difficult to afford any treatment also. That is also another issue that we are facing.
எல்லா பிரைவேட் ஹாஸ்பிட்டலும் தான் ஏசிம்டமேட்டிக் கோவிடுக்கு எல்லாமே 4 லட்சம் 5 லட்சம் எல்லாத்தையும் கறந்துட்டாங்க. அதுலயே பாதி எக்கானமி தான் ஆயிடுச்சு.
அங்க எப்படி சார் எல்லாம் திருச்சியில தஞ்சாவூர்ல எல்லாரும் வேக்சின் எல்லாம் போட்டீங்களா? ஃபர்ஸ்ட் டோஸ்
போட்டோம். நீங்க போட்டீங்களா?
போட்டாச்சு, முதல் நாளே போய் போட்டாச்சு.
எது சார் போட்டீங்க? கோவிஷீல்டா கோவேக்சினா சார்?
கோவிஷீல்டு சார். இங்க சென்னையில வந்து கேட்கலனாலும் எல்லாருக்கும் கோவிஷீல்டு தான் சார் போடுறாங்க. அவங்களே ஒரு கோவேக்சின் மேல ஒரு பயஸ் இருக்கு. கவர்மெண்ட் ஹாஸ்பிட்டல்ல போய் கேட்டாலே சார் நாங்க எல்லாருக்கும் கோவிஷீல்டு தான் சார் போடுறோம் அப்படின்னு. The government has sent about I think 95:1 ratioல they have sent Covishield versus Covaxin. So if you ask for a Covaxin, they have to dig out from the fridge. What is outside is Covishield. டக்குன்னு குத்துறாங்க.
நாங்கெல்லாம் இப்ப phase 3 ட்ரையல்ல என்ரோல் ஆயிருக்கோம். நான்லாம் கோவேக்சின் போட்டிருக்கேன்.
அப்படியே ஓகே. இங்க எல்லாருக்கும் சென்னையில ஆல்மோஸ்ட் 95 to 96% கோவிஷீல்டு மாத்திரம் தான். எக்ஸப்ட் அந்த ஹெல்த் மினிஸ்டர் ஒருத்தரும் அந்த ராதாகிருஷ்ணன் ஒருத்தரும் மாத்திரம் கோவேக்சின் போட்டாங்க. மற்றவங்க எல்லாம் ஆல் தி ஹெல்த் ஒர்க்கர்ஸ், ஆல் தி டாக்டர்ஸ், எவ்ரிபடி, ஸ்டூடெண்ட்ஸ், எவ்ரிஒன் ஹேட் ஒன்லி கோவிஷீல்டு. Even the government purchased, like the allotment was very low on Covaxin.
शिवकुमार सर का Can we start, sir? Almost 20 participants are there, sir.
Sure. நீங்க எப்ப சொல்றீங்களோ உடனே நான் ஆரம்பிச்சேன்.
Maniram and Suraj, I find them online.
Sure.
Maniram and Suraj, both of you can take charge and start the proceeding.
It is a warm honor for us to welcome Dr. Shivakumar, one of the eminent pediatric cardiologists of whole of the world. And it is a privilege to have him talk about tips and tricks of ASD device closure in our Trichy Cardiac Forum. There is no need for introduction to Dr. Shivakumar, sir. So he is a pioneer in all kind of pediatric interventions, valvular interventions, and all kind of structural interventions. So I would like to welcome Shivakumar, sir, to present this topic.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Suraj, Dr. Aravind, Dr. Maniram, and all other friends from Trichy, Tanjavur district. And it is, I feel very happy to be part of this Trichy Cardiac Club. I suppose it is a relatively younger club, and I wish it grows to great strengths and become a very powerful unit in the future. Now, about ASD device closure. Worldwide, more than about 4 lakh devices have been implanted. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Worldwide, more than 4 lakh devices have been implanted of the nitinol self-centering Amplatzer-like devices. Well, the reason why I am telling Amplatzer-like devices is, of this 400,000 devices, close to about 250,000 devices were from the Amplatzer. A substantial majority from the Chinese similar products, and of late recently, some of the European products like Occlutech and others. The information that I'll be sharing with you will be on my own personal experience of somewhere close to about 4,000 plus devices accumulated over the last around 20 years. ASD device closure has now become a more standardized procedure. So I will divide my talks into 3 groups. Number 1, what are the conventional indications and when we will deviate from the conventional indication. Second, what are the conventional techniques and when we will deviate from the conventional techniques. And third will be what are the peculiar problems. And I understand, apart from Maniram Krishna, almost all of you are conventional practitioners who practice predominantly with adult cardiology, and hence I probably will be in the problems. I will discuss more about adults with ASD in particular. Selection criteria. In general, age above 2 years and weight above 15 years is what is preferred, because this is an elective procedure. Most of the children are asymptomatic, and hence there is no necessity for you to do in patients who are younger and who are smaller. What are the problems if you are doing in a smaller age? Procedural complications are a little bit more common. It's logical, because you need a larger vascular access, and the larger vascular access can produce vascular access related complications. If you have a small air embolism or a thrombus embolism, a thrombus or an air in a tiny baby is going to be more hazardous than in a 30-year-old or 40-year-old patient. However, the UK and US phase 2 trials had included patients even up to 8 kilograms. Each institution and each operator will have his own age-based criteria depending on his safety network. For example, in centers like Germany, Berlin Heart Institute, where there is a large experience with patients, out of 654 patients who had an ASD device closure, almost 11% of the patients were less than 2 years, with age ranging from 3.9 months to 23.8 months, and weight ranging from 3.8 to 14.5. That means there will be a small proportion of patients who are quite symptomatic with heart failure who may benefit from a device closure, and you need to be very careful in selecting them. 2 of the 3 failures among these 71 patients were due to inadequate left atrial size, allowing the left atrial disc to fully expand. Similarly, there is an US report of patients who were under 1 year of age, 15 days to 11.9 months, where the weight was ranging from 3.8 to 8.3 kilograms. Again, this also showed procedural success. So if there is a need in less than 2 years due to substantial heart failure, recurrent respiratory infections, it can be done, but usual indications will be more than 2 years. What about older age? Long ago, Mayo Clinic published their data in the 1970s. If you have a patient who is less than 40 years, the survival is quite long. If you follow them up, many of them remain largely asymptomatic, whether they are operated or unoperated. But once they are more than 40 years and you start their enrollment, there is a rapid decline. That means there is a progressive reduction in their survival, either due to heart failure or pulmonary hypertension or atrial arrhythmia. However, even in those who are more than 40, if you are operating them, you are able to lift their survival curves. So it means a patient who is even older than 40 years, who is having a symptomatic ASD, if you intervene on them, they are going to have substantial improvement in their survival and their morbidities. Of course, the problem will be atrial arrhythmias, atrial fibrillation, need for oral anticoagulation. We will come to it when we are talking about patients in the elderly. What about weight? Weight less than 10 kilogram has more procedural issues. Space in the left atrium will be smaller. So there is an anecdotal report. ASD diameter more than 200% of the weight, do not attempt. Which means if a 10 kilo child is there and the defect is more than 20 millimeters, it is better not to do it. However, there may be rare exceptions to this rule. This is a 10 kilogram child who was implanted with a 28 millimeter device for a 27 millimeter ASD. This child is doing reasonably well. So here, if you look at what is the percentage of oversizing, it is 270%. So occasionally, 280%. Occasionally, there may be a very carefully selected patient who can have a relatively larger device in a smaller weight also. However, the general rule is a weight more than 15 kilogram and age more than 2 years, if they are relatively asymptomatic, will be a preferred weight and age. Left atrium will not have adequate size if the child is too small, and in these patients, if there are any complications, retrievals will be difficult. Hence, it may not be recommended in relatively less experienced centers. Second criteria, defect with 5 millimeter margins all around is the conventional selection criteria. So 5 millimeter margin should be there all around. It is a safe network. So what are the margins? The margins can be antero-inferior related to the tricuspid and mitral valve, antero-superior related to the aorta, superior related to the superior vena cava, inferior related to the inferior vena cava, and posterior related to the atrial margin. So this is a patient with an ASD with a retroaortic margin which is completely deficient. What are the issues about it? Erosion has been found to be marginally more common in patients who are having retroaortic rim deficiency. Long ago, the data that was published in 2004 showed that more number of erosions were associated with anterosuperior rim deficiency. Subsequently, there was a significant caution from all the cardiologists that retroaortic rim deficiency should be avoided. But later it was understood that whenever ASDs are larger relatively, almost always the anterosuperior rim will be deficient. And hence, this was not actually related directly to the anterosuperior rim deficiency. The general recommendations now are, in patients with anterosuperior rim deficiency, take sufficient care and avoid an oversized device. Don't try to oversize too much. Whether to flare in the aorta or not flare in the aorta. So this is an aorta which is being flared by the device. You can see the device getting flared on either sides. This is a device that is not at all flaring. In general, a flaring is preferred. The reason being, the two devices will oppose against the dilated aorta in a much more safer manner rather than the pointing tips of the devices towards the atrial margin. And this particular appearance is prone for developing aorto-RA or aorto-LA fistula by eroding into the aorta. So if at all you have a patient with a retroaortic rim deficiency, it is better to flare along the aortic margin in order to avoid a perforation. Posterior margin deficiency, this is on 0 degree transesophageal view. There is no posterior margin at all. And this is inferior margin deficiency. This is on subxiphoid view, inferior vena cava, IVC deficiency. Whenever there is a posterior or inferior margin deficiency, if they are isolated, we may be able to devise. However, if there is a combined postero-inferior deficiency, failure is more common. Third issue, in general, the defects less than 34 millimeters are advised for device closure. Why? US FDA approved devices only up to 38 millimeter amplatzer. So more than 34 will not be suitable at all for a device closure. However, outside the USA market, 40 millimeter amplatzer is available. And with the non-amplatzer vendors, even up to 48 millimeter is available. So this is a device, this is a ASD that is measuring 39 millimeter, which means this is outside the American recommendation. So this was closed using a 42 millimeter device. Now, this is an even extreme example of a 42 millimeter ASD. You can see that there is a relative posterior margin deficiency with a 42 millimeter deficiency, and this is a 42 millimeter device with the balloon assistance is being deployed. What is the feasibility and safety of these devices that are more than 40 millimeters? So we used more than 40 millimeter devices in a large group of patients, of close to about 31 patients with more than 40 millimeter device and 17 patients with 40 millimeter device. We made a comparison and we found that larger devices are also equally safe, and this was published in the Catheterization and Cardiovascular Intervention. In general, it is preferred to have a single defect. If you have multiple defects, then multiple devices may be needed. So it is preferred to have a single defect. So if you have a defect with an additional defect, if that additional defect is pretty close, then through the larger orifice, you may be able to go and put a relatively larger device to close both together. When it is even more complex, like multiple ASDs, especially associated with a septal aneurysm, this is a three-dimensional left atrial view, you have to identify the largest orifice on transesophageal echocardiography and position a device in such a way that you will be able to cover all the entire margins. Sometimes if the devices are too far apart, like more than 6 millimeter apart, we may have to use double devices, and always it is better to use the smaller device first and overlap the larger device on the top of the smaller device. In these patients, since there are multiple defects, it is useful to do a balloon sizing and use the device according to the balloon sizing. So this is separately, two venous sheets are taken, two balloon sizing is being done, and two devices are placed. So if you look carefully, this is a superior device and this is an inferior device. What is the concern? Whenever there is a large device area, there is a possibility of delay in endothelialization, and hence there may be a thrombus formation. So we tend to prefer a dual antiplatelets in these patients. We have implanted close to about 25 patients in the last 7 years with two devices with no issues on follow-up. The previous implantations were in other institutions, and these 25 patients, we are now getting it published in immediate near future. So this is the difference in the devices. When there are multiple devices, we have to understand that the devices will have different orientation, because atrial septum is not like a straight line. So the superior part of the atrial septum will be more vertical and the inferior portion will be more horizontal, and hence the two devices will have a different orientation. This is our data of around 25 recent patients in the last 7 years, and with complete procedural safety with use of two devices. There should be a definite left-right shunt of more than 1.5:1, 1.5:1, and RV volume overload. This is the criteria for a device closure. But sometimes you will overstep this criteria. You may do it in patients even with less than 1.5:1 criteria. What are the reasons? If you have an ASD in a patient who is having a hypoplastic right ventricle or hypoplastic tricuspid valve, especially after critical valvular pulmonary stenosis and you have done the balloon pulmonary valvotomy, these patients are prone for paradoxical embolism from right to left. And hence in these patients, it may be advisable to close. Similarly, an Epstein's anomaly, which is having mild tricuspid regurgitations and predominantly left-right shunt, may also get benefited by a device closure, because RA-RV volume overload due to the ASD will be prevented, and many patients with a mild form of Epstein's anomaly may remain compensated for too long a period without any major issues. So in these patients, sometimes you may do a device closure even when the shunt is less than 1.5:1. there sometimes will be a need for closing ASDs with very small shunt also. This is a patient with carcinoid syndrome. We can appreciate the tricuspid valve completely splintered. So there was a small ASD. This carcinoid neurotransmitters, because of the tricuspid regurgitation, get transmitted onto the left side, and the left side is now getting early onset of mitral regurgitation and aortic regurgitation. So now you have to prevent the neurotransmitters from crossing over. So even though the shunt is small and the ASD is small, you go and close these ASDs. So these are some of the examples of ASD closure in patients in whom, even if the shunt is less than 2:1. The patient should have an acceptable pulmonary vascular resistance and should not have significant PAH. If they have a severe PAH, closure is completely contraindicated. Patients with PVRI of more than 8 Wood units are in general not safe candidates for closure at all. However, there are certain fenestrated devices that are currently available, which may be sometimes appropriate if the patient is on proper pulmonary vasodilator therapy. And on pulmonary vasodilator therapy, if you are able to demonstrate a progressive reduction in the pulmonary vascular resistance on repeat cardiac catheterization. The last, no major associated cardiac anomaly. In general, the associated cardiac anomalies are mitral regurgitation, severe pulmonary stenosis, and PAPVC, or partial anomalous pulmonary venous connection. So this is a patient with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. A patient with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy who has a mild to moderate LVOT obstruction. The problem about the mild to moderate LVOT obstruction is it increases the LV-EDP, increases the left-right shunt. So this is an ASD device closure in a patient who is having a mild to moderate LVOT obstruction of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. In order to reduce the shunt, and HOCM is medically managed with beta blockers. This is a patient with a dilated cardiomyopathy. A dilated cardiomyopathy is actually increasing the left-right shunt and causing progressive heart failure, and you are addressing it with a device closure. There is a functional mild MR. You give all the guideline-directed treatment for dilated cardiomyopathy that includes carvedilol, enalapril, aldactone, and do the device closure also. This is a patient with infiltrative cardiomyopathy, marked thickening of the heart with large ASD. The ASD is shunting abundantly left-right because of the elevated LV and diastolic pressure. Close the ASD and give the heart failure management with diuretics and enalapril and maintain these patients. Basically, in spite of an associated disease like a cardiomyopathy, closure of the atrial septal defect after a careful hemodynamic assessment may be indicated in order to keep them less symptomatic for a reasonable period of time. Partial anomalous pulmonary venous connection is in general a contraindication for closure of the ASD, but there are some patients with partial anomalous pulmonary venous connection who have dual pulmonary venous drainage. So this is a patient who is having a PAPVC into the right upper pulmonary vein, into the right superior vena cava. You do a balloon occlusion, make a right upper pulmonary artery angiography, and on the levo phase, you will appreciate that the pulmonary veins have collateralization and it goes down to the right lower pulmonary vein. And in these cases, you close the pulmonary venous orifice and the ASD together. The other associated anomalies are associated valvular pulmonary stenosis, where you may be able to do a balloon pulmonary valvotomy. Associated perimembranous VSD, where you may be able to do a perimembranous VSD device closure plus an ASD device closure, or a PDA device closure and ASD device closure. And patients with Lutem-Bascher syndrome may have balloon mitral valvotomy plus ASD device closure. Some of the other diseases, associated disease, like for example, a connective tissue disorder, arterial tortuosity syndrome, who also has got a large ASD. There is no specific treatment for these conditions except maybe a smaller doses of enalapril, and you go ahead and close the ASDs because there is a significantly large shunt with a large cardiomegaly. A patient who has a mitral valve replacement with a Starr-Edward prosthesis, it is in general, surgeons try to do a left atrial incision, go into the left atrium and do the mitral valve replacement, and very often they won't look at the atrial septum. So this patient who had a moderate sized atrial septal defect after a Starr-Edward prosthesis started to have larger shunt from left to right because of the ASD that was left behind, and that progressively resulted in larger and larger right atrium and right ventricular volume overload, which was also closed. So there may be a role for closure of ASDs even if they have some associated diseases, provided closure of the ASD will be substantially resulting in maintenance of the hemodynamics. The last question will be, is there any difference between the different vendors, Amplatzer, Lifetech, Occlutech? We made a randomized prospective concurrent comparison between Lifetech, Amplatzer and Occlutech on about 150 devices each, consecutive patients. And we found that there is no basic fundamental difference in the outcomes or complications between all these devices. So far, what we saw was the conventional indications and how we made a deviation from the indications. Now, the conventional techniques and where we deviate from the conventional techniques. Originally, the conventional technique was to use a balloon sizing, and based on the balloon size, choose the device. Now, for a large extent, in most of the centers, balloon sizing has been given up in India, even though this is the preferred practice in the United States of America and most of the European centers. In general, in any person, whoever starts a device program, it may be a good idea to do a balloon sizing in addition to echocardiography, and this will reinforce our sizing abilities far better. After doing the sizing, the ASD is closed by opening out the device, the left atrial disc in the left atrium. And once it is released in the left atrium, then open out the right atrial disc and check on echocardiography and then subsequently release. So this is what is called as a conventional device. Patients who are having associated left superior vena cava to coronary sinus will not have any relation between the atrial septal defect and the coronary sinus. And so presence of coronary sinus, dilated coronary sinus, is not a contraindication for any form of secondum ASD. When there are two defects that are apart by 6 millimeters, balloon sizing is preferred. You first cross one of the device and put a balloon and close the defect. Once you have closed, the second catheter will now cross through the second defect and now put a balloon through the second one also and close that defect. With both the balloons inflated, do an echocardiography now and assess is there a residual flow. Once you know that there is no residual flow, deflate one of the balloon and take it out and put a sheath through that wire. And once you have a sheath through that wire, put a device, and then through the second sheath, through the second balloon, take another sheath and then put in a second device also. Sometimes you can resize after putting the first device about whether there is a reduction in the size of the next defect, and then take a decision accordingly. And finally, put the two devices, and once you have checked that there is no residual flow, release both. Conventional techniques fails if there is a rim deficiency. So the strategies, whenever the margins are deficient, there is a left atrial disc prolapse of the device through the ASD. So what we try to do is use some gadgets to prevent the left atrial disc from slipping through. Either it can be with a catheter or a stiffer catheter or a guide wire. This is a dilator that is going from the other axis. So basically this guide wire or the stiff wire will prevent the left atrial disc from slipping through. The second suggestion in the past was modifying the sheath tip. So there is a special type of sheath that is called Lock-Harsdorff sheath, which has got a peculiar angulation. Or sometimes you can take the conventional Mullin sheath and make an angled cut. So this is yet another modification. Once you make an angled cut, the device will come in a more perpendicular manner to the septum. If you are having a conventional sheath, the sheath will come more at an angle, and so that it will prolapse of the ASD. But if you have a cut sheath, it will come more in an alignment with the atrial septum and will get deployed properly. The third method is don't allow the left atrial disc to come near the intraatrial septum at all. So which is otherwise called as pulmonary vein deployment or left atrial deployment. So this is a deployment within the left pulmonary vein, and once it is in the pulmonary vein, then deploy the RA disc so that the device is secure. The same thing sometimes can be done in the right upper pulmonary vein. You open in the right upper pulmonary vein and then peel back, open the right atrial disc and wait for the left atrial disc to fall back. So these are the pulmonary vein deployment technique. Sometimes you may hitch against the left atrial roof, and this is called as a left atrial roof technique. You hitch against the left atrial roof and then deploy the device. These are methods to prevent the left atrial disc from prolapsing through the atrial septal defect. Sometimes you may use a balloon to prevent the slippage also. It's called balloon assisted technique proposed by Dr. Bharat Dalvi from Mumbai. Take two venous access across two pulmonary veins, put in a large balloon through one of the wires and inflate that balloon across the atrial septum. Open out the LA disc in the pulmonary vein or in the left atrium. The balloon will prevent the disc from coming into the right atrium. And once the device left atrial disc is fully open, on the other side of the balloon, open out the RA disc. So this is the RA disc opened on the RA, LA disc opened in the LA, and the balloon is preventing the left atrial disc from prolapsing out. So if I'm showing it on a video, this is the left atrial disc, the right atrial disc, and the balloon. And once the two discs are well positioned, slowly now deflate the balloon. The balloon gets deflated progressively. And once the balloon is fully deflated, the balloon and the wire are taken out. So this method ensures that the device does not get prolapsed across the atrial septum. Sometimes if you have the spherical balloons not available for you, you can use the AGA balloon, that is the sizing balloon, or the Ty-Shak balloon valvuloplasty balloons. They are also acceptable. It can be performed even in a small child. But what is the drawback of this particular procedure? You need two venous access. So you have to puncture both right and left femoral veins. So with the increasing experience nowadays, in the last maybe about 2 years, we have not done any single balloon assisted technique at all, because we are able to perform majority of these devices either with right upper, left upper pulmonary veins or left atrial roof technique itself, so that we complete the procedure with a single venous access. This is yet another technique that we published, which is called snare assisted release. If you have a doubt about the device position, and if you feel that there is an impending chance of embolization, before releasing the screw end, snare the screw end. So the snare is now holding and the screw has been released. Once you appreciate that the device is in a perfect position and it is not at a risk of embolization, then release the snare. But if you feel that the device is unstable, you can snare it out straight away. So if you know that the device is in a secure position, then open out the snare and release the snare. So this is called as a snare assisted technique, which is quite useful in patients who are having relatively deficient margins and where you are anticipating an impending risk of embolization. Which is the fluoroscopic projection to use, whether it is the anteroposterior projection or it is a LAO projection. It's very variable, depends on the operator's understanding. I prefer to do everything in AP projection, except if I am coming from non-femoral venous access. There was a patient with inferior vena cava interruption where we are coming from the jugular vein, and obviously the sheath goes into the left ventricle here across the ASD, and you position a device. And in these patients, it is difficult to get a proper orientation on AP view. And hence, if I am coming from jugular, I tend to use an LAO cranial projection. But otherwise, it is by and large an AP projection. Intraprocedurally, we give heparin. Try to minimize the sheath manipulation. We don't use a balloon sizing usually except in multiple device. Sheath de-airing should be done with a clear underwater seal. Preferable to remove the dilator in the inferior vena cava if you have any difficulty in passage of the sheath. Don't accept a left atrial appendage park of the sheath tip, because left atrial appendage is prone for injuries. And it is better to have an arterial line pulse oximetry or an NIBP to monitor the aortic pressures and oxygen saturations consistently. What are the problems? Device deformities are peculiar for Nitinol. It is due to the lack of memory characteristics of the device. One of the commonly described deformity is cobra head deformity, which has been known ever since the late 90s when the device was made. And this is an extreme example of a cobra deformity. And there are various other forms of deformities. This is called as an angulated deformity, where the device expands at an angle. There are devices, the abnormalities called box-like deformity, where the left atrial device remains like a box, but later, within a few minutes, gets back to original position. And this is yet another a box-like deformity. You can see that the left atrial disc remains like a box even after the release of the RA disc. The RA disc will get released here, and it remains like a box, but after a few seconds, then it regains its memory and becomes normal. Cobra deformities and other deformities are more common with balloon assisted technique, and hence we nowadays don't prefer to use a balloon assisted technique. These are other deformities called cone deformity. It's like a cone, and this is a cup like deformity where the device takes a very concave configuration, and these are difficult to be retrieved inside the sheath. This is a disc like deformity. Basically, nitinol is a metal with good memory. However, memory may fail. This is a lantern-like deformity. You can see that it's like in Tamil what we call as kuttu velakku. So this is a lantern-like deformity, and these lanterns upper end will never get into the sheath. And in such cases, you may have to catch the upper end of the sheath in order to make it slenderized so that you will be able to pull it out. Otherwise, the upper portion of the disc will never enter the sheath again. We published our reports on the various types of cobra and other shape memory abnormalities. What is the incidence? What is the predisposing factors and outcomes? In general, it is due to sheath twisting, or it is due to the device being twisted as we are advancing, sheath oversizing, or deployment within a restrained left atrial area, which is causing the cobra, rather than the type of the device. All the types of devices are prone for cobra head. Sometimes there may be altered intracardiac anomaly. This is a condition called juxtaposed atrial appendage. This is a right atrial appendage and left atrial appendage. Both are on the left side. This patient has got a condition called anatomically corrected malposition of the great arteries, where the atrial septum is actually in a sort of coronal plane, and the left atrium is behind and the right atrium is anterior. You can see that the device is in the center of the heart, with the left atrium posteriorly and right atrium anteriorly, and this condition is associated with juxtaposition of the atrial appendage. Some patients may have very severe kyphoscoliosis, which will completely alter the anatomy, or this is, in other words, altered extracardiac anatomy. Altered vascular access, I already mentioned, a patient who is having IVC interruption with a jugular venous approach. So we will talk about what are the late problems. One of the major fears nowadays for doctors is the radiation. You would have seen in the last 2 or 3 years in all the TAN CSI and various other meetings, there is an increasing amount of stress on the radiation that is given for any patient. So now non-fluoroscopic echo-guided ASD device closures are slowly increasing the attraction to the interventionist. And we have done a few of these patients on echo guidance alone without fluoroscopy. But I would say if a conventional ASD takes about 10 to 15 minutes to perform, an echo-guided ASD device will take about close to 1 hour. And so you need to have a relatively longer free lab time for you to get these procedures done. Embolization of the devices is a problem which sometimes is intra-procedural or sometimes immediately after the procedure. Very often it is due to incorrect assessment of the margins, and we should not hesitate to have a surgical retrieval if there is a device embolization, and we should not delay a surgical referral. Thrombosis on the device may occur in a small proportion of patients, and hence it is advisable to give antiplatelets for 6 months. If you have a larger device or multiple devices, dual antiplatelets. If the patient has paroxysmal atrial arrhythmias, even oral anticoagulation. Headaches are a common problem caused by platelet activation on the nitinol surface of the left atrium, and flunarizine, which is given as an anti-migraine prophylaxis, is a very valuable adjuvant in these patients. Pericardial effusions may indicate erosion. However, we need to understand whenever there is a large ASD, the sudden shrinkage of the right atrium and right ventricle will produce a pericardial translucency, because the RA will shrink immediately, but the pericardium will not shrink immediately. Now I come to the last part of the talk, elderly with ASD, which is quite common in many of your practice. The peculiar problems are very large size of the heart and very large ASDs. ASDs may surprisingly be 45 millimeter, 40 millimeter in a patient who is an adult. They may be having restrictive LV physiology due to a variety of reasons that increase the left ventricular end diastolic pressure. Prone for atrial fibrillation, prone for degenerative AV nodal disease. They already may be having either a complete heart block or intermittent AV nodal block. Concurrent coronary artery disease, systemic and pulmonary thromboembolism may be present. This is a 46 millimeter device that is being placed on a 40 millimeter ASD in an adult patient. So this is balloon assisted technique, a large 46 millimeter device that is in place. The 46 millimeter device will have a 64 millimeter LA disc, which will be quite large, but you will understand that the heart is also very, very large in these patients. Patients with atrial fibrillations who are having frequent strokes may benefit from concurrent left atrial appendage device closure. So you can appreciate the fast atrial fibrillation, very, very, very crooked left atrial appendage with multiple saculations and prone for recurrent strokes. And so what we are doing here is putting in a sheath into the left atrium before closing the ASD, putting in an Amplatzer cardiac plug. This is a 28 millimeter Amplatzer cardiac plug to close the left atrial appendage. And this is followed by the closure of the atrial septal defect. You can appreciate how restrictive is the left ventricle. I'll just freeze and show you the left ventricle. This is the left ventricle in diastole, the fully open. See the size of the heart and the relative size of the left ventricle. Left ventricle is relatively small. The entire heart is actually occupied by the right ventricle. Now I'll show the left ventricular in its systolic frame. It is just squeezed out to one small cavity. It's even smaller than the size of the Amplatzer cardiac plug that we have positioned. So these patients are prone for restrictive LV physiology, and hence they will benefit from what is called as fenestrated devices. This is a 44 millimeter fenestrated occlutech device, which will have around 6 to 8 millimeter fenestration to allow a continued left-right shunt so that the left atrial pressure does not increase. See the size of the heart and the amount of heart failure the patient will be having, and these patients will substantially improve if you put in a fenestrated device. Patients sometimes with complete heart block. This is a patient who was having 42 millimeter ASD with a complete heart block with severe heart failure. Initially, pacemaker was needed because the bradycardia was so profound that the heart rates were going down to 25 and 30. So initial pacemaker was done, and then subsequently we crossed with a 16 French sheath, and this is a 48 millimeter occlutech fenestrated ASD device with balloon assistance. And this is one of the largest ASD device. It's a 48 millimeter. So the left atrial disc is 66 millimeters, but it is with the fenestration. And these patients will do substantially well clinically on follow-up. This patient, in fact, is not on any diuretics, is just on oral antiplatelet drugs along with medications for systemic hypertension. If there is an associated coronary artery disease, either they can have a concurrent PCI or a sequential PCI. If they have systemic or pulmonary embolism, prolonged dual antiplatelets, if there is a Holter for paroxysmal atrial arrhythmia, and if they have an atrial fibrillation, oral anticoagulation or NOAC. So what we discussed so far were conventional indications and exceptions, conventional techniques with special mention to elderly. So what we need to be aware about is ASD device closure has a clear advantage of cosmesis. It shortens the hospital stay. It reduces the morbidity, and definitely it reduces the mortality in the relatively elderly. Safety and procedural outcome should definitely be similar at least to surgery or even better than surgery. And hence we should not afford to have any major procedural complications much more than what will happen after surgery. And since this technology is relatively new, the first ASD device of the present generation devices were in 1997 to 1998. So our experience is only for 22 to 23 years. And hence you should continue to closely follow them up, have a surveillance of these patients and keep collecting the data. And we should remember that all these procedures should be at a significantly affordable cost compared to a surgical approach for an atrial septal defect. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll be happy to take up any questions.
That is a wonderful presentation. You started from the basics and then you explained all the complex cases. It was a nice opportunity for us to listen to your talk. And as always, you are the best in putting ideas into everyone's mind with the classical pictures and all the diaphragm representative pictures. Sir, I have certain doubts regarding ASD in elderly, sir. So do you always check up an LV EDP in all the patients and what cutoff do you have? A pre-procedure or post-device, do you keep the pigtail over there to monitor the LV EDP and you see the rise? And what precautions do you take, whether you start on AC inhibitors and you give them diuretics? And post procedure, what kind of drugs do you give?
Yes. So it's an extremely good question. Now let us just talk about some basic hemodynamics. Let's assume that the patient is at a pre-procedural higher probability of having an elevated LVED, which means the patient is a long-standing diabetic, long-standing hypertension, or a coronary artery disease, or in echocardiogram itself, you are finding that these patients are having some features of significant diastolic dysfunction. And you anticipate that these patients are likely to have elevated LVED. Look at the inferior vena cava. A patient with a left ventricular end diastolic pressure will have an elevated LA pressure, and the LA pressure will transmit to RA, and RA pressure will be high, inferior vena cava will be congested. Jugular venous pulse will be elevated. If you have a patient who is not having a jugular venous pulse which is elevated and the IVC is not congested on the echocardiogram, that means this is a safer subset. Take him up into the cath lab. Put in the first catheter into the right atrium and measure the right atrial pressure. If the right atrial pressure is at a low level, say 3, 4, 5, these patients have similar LA pressure because there is a large AST, same RA and LA pressure. So a patient who is having a 3, 4, 5 LA pressure is very unlikely to have a substantially elevated left ventricular end diastolic pressure to create a problem for you. But you put in the catheter and you find that the RA pressure is 10, 11, 12. That means LA pressure is 10, 11, and 12. Left atrial pressure is 10, 11, and 12 in spite of the decompression of the ASD. So if you go and close this ASD, they will have further elevation. So if you are, when I am starting the patient, if the patient is having a RA pressure of only 3, 4, I go ahead with the ASD device closure, always with a left ventricular pigtail catheter monitoring the left ventricle. So we put in the catheter into the left ventricle and the left ventricular end diastolic pressure is say 10. Because the RA pressure is only 3, the moment I close the ASD, if the pressure goes from 10 to 16 or 18, on table, we stop the IV fluid. We give 1 dose of intravenous Lasix 40 milligram. Look at the blood pressure, and if the blood pressure is strikingly high, we give either sublingual nifedipine to acutely cut down or start on some NTG to cut down, or we give IV labetalol to cut down the blood pressure. Wait for a few minutes. As the blood pressure comes down and the 40 milligram Lasix, which is a powerful instant venodilator, is acting, there will be a reduction in the left ventricular end diastolic pressure. If the end diastolic pressure reduces to a decent level of 12 to 14, you release the device. Let's assume that you are not having a reduction of the left ventricular end diastolic pressure to acceptable levels. It still remains high. But based on your prior assessment, if the patient was having quite a large ASD, take out the device and fenestrate it, custom fenestrate it on table, which means you can create a hole within that atrial septal defect fabric, a reasonably large hole to about 7 to 8 millimeter, which you can use initially needle and subsequently blades to cut out the fabric. The second method is, if you have a surgeon's cautery with you, many of the cardiologists may be doing permanent pacemakers, and it's common practice to have a surgical cautery within the cath lab itself. Take the cautery, don't go near the nitinol wire, spread out the nitinol wire and go and touch the fabric. The fabric will burn through. So create a hole in the fabric, 8 millimeter hole, and go ahead and put it. These patients will be better off. Second thing, after the procedure, don't stop with that 1 dose of IV Lasix that you have given. Maintain them on Lasix for another 48 hours and ensure that their blood pressure is monitored on a 2-hourly or 4-hourly basis, and keep on pumping with antihypertensives, which can either be a calcium channel blocker or an ACE inhibitor or any of the drugs depending on the patient's renal function, and keep giving antihypertensives in an adequate dose and maintain them for about 48 hours. At the end of 48 hours, if they are remaining fine, thereafter they will be fine, because the body will remodel itself to that increased systemic, the pulmonary venous return going through that left ventricle. So it is the first 48 hours which we need to be very careful about. So I always tell my fellows, if your RA pressure is only 3, forget about it. That patient is a safe candidate. If the RA pressure is 11, 12, that means it's a warning sign. You are going to get into problem. So the basics of the first catheterization itself will be identifying. And even before that, you put an echo probe on the inferior vena cava congested or a JVP which is elevated, that is a sign of elevated LVED. It's easy to diagnose an elevated LVEDP in a patient with atrial septal defect because entire left atrial hemodynamics will come to the right atrium and you'll be able to see all the parameters.
That's a wonderful explanation, sir. I also have one more doubt, sir. Recently, I had an ASD. It is around a 12-year-old child. So it was a quite large ASD. But after deploying the device in the monitor, we could see that the PR interval was little prolonged. But there was no complete heart block. And the P waves are of the same morphology. And there was only a minimal PR interval prolongation. So
Yes.
I just monitored the patient. I didn't release the device. I kept it there for around 10-15 minutes, and then it settled on its own. On table, we took another ECG. The PR interval was same as the before. Just for a transient period of around 15-20 minutes, there was a PR interval prolongation. Does this kind of mild PR interval prolongation have any long-term effects on those patients? Is it anything like that, sir? What's your experience?
Yeah. So what we are talking about is the relation between a secondum atrial septal defect and a AV nodal conduction abnormality. The genetic reason for atrial septal defect itself sometimes can be due to a TBX5 mutation, wherein the patient can have a secondum ASD and a predisposition to AV nodal block. These patients, when you have a tendency for a prolonged PR interval or sometimes Wenke-Back phenomenon, even in the pre-procedural ECGs that have been done on 2 or 3 occasions, it's a good idea always to go back and see all the ECGs of the patient before you take them on table. There may be times at which when a fully sedated child will nicely show a long PR interval with sometimes even Wenke-Backing. And then when they're aggressive, agitated, crying, then they will have shortened PR interval. And during the procedure, when you give a deeper level of sedation, they will again have agotonia and they will have a prolonged PR interval. So it may be possible. Now, what are the ways in which we can injure the AV node during the ASD device closure? Patients who are having relatively smaller inferior wall deficiency as well as a deficiency in the region of the coronary sinus, a large device may go and hitch against the AV nodal conduction bundle itself. These patients can be identified by apical 4-chamber view where the mitral margin will be very inadequate. So in such a patient, when you are deploying the device and if there is an immediate complete AV nodal dissociation, that means these patients are prone for it. Now there is also another aspect for complete heart block. Sometimes what will happen is after you release the device in the left atrium, and as you are opening the device in the right atrial disc in the right atrium and allowing it to slowly go and hitch against the left atrium, sometimes in our anxiety, we will quickly open the right atrial disc and go and jam against the left atrial disc. So this forcible opposition of the right atrial disc against the atrial septum, hitting against the region of the triangle of Koch and mechanically causing a problem can also be a reason. So you just recollect how I deployed the right atrial disc. If I had been too rough in like pushing the right atrial disc in order to prevent the LA disc from prolapsing, then that could be a reason, in which case take back the device, wait for some time and allow the AV nodal conduction to recover. Few minutes later, repeat the device now, but deploy the RA disc very slowly. Allow the RA disc to form fully in the RA like a ball and slowly make it collapse towards the atrial septum. Sometimes a slow movement will prevent it. The third thing, there may be a small subset of patients who would have exhibited the pre-procedural complete AV nodal block at various times in their previous ECGs. In them, warn the patients that ASD and AV nodal block are two associated diseases in patients who are having genetic mutation. In majority of these patients, the familial ASD will be there. If the mother is having ASD, sister is having ASD, brother is having ASD, majority of them will have prolonged PR interval. So familial ASDs are more prone for it, and inform the patients that these patients ultimately may need permanent pacemaker implantation at some times in future. Whether you do by surgery or by device, they will need permanent pacemaker.
Sir, you were telling about the traumatic AV nodal disturbance, no, sir. Is there any role for post-procedural steroid or 1 or 2 doses? Is there any roles or any studies, or what is your experience, sir?
Yeah, it is basically an extrapolation from the VSD data. So people tend to give, but the difference here is it is much more rarer to have a complete heart block after an ASD device closure than a VSD device closure. And hence, and second thing is, if you are having an intra-procedural ASD device closure related complete heart block, it is conventional to immediately pull out the device rather than keep it there. And hence even though steroids are being given, you don't wait for the steroid to make it recover and then reassess what is the situation, because you are still attached to the cable, and the natural tendency for any interventionist will be to take out the device. So often what happens is, if there is a complete AV nodal dissociation, the moment you put in a device, the device is taken out, wait for a few seconds, few minutes, allow it to normalize. And if it has normalized, then think about how you deployed the RA disc. And if that RA disc you feel that was traumatic, or the sheath crossing was traumatic, do it gently the next time and retry. If in spite of that, if the second time also, if you are having AV nodal block, these patients should not go for it.
One more question, sir. Sir, how often do you use transesophageal echo in adult ASD, sir? And what is the proportion, sir? And which cases specifically you choose for a transesophageal echo, or what is your protocol, sir?
Yeah. So basically, what is the necessity for a transesophageal echocardiography? A transesophageal echocardiography improves your identification of all the margins of the defect and ensures that your device is clasping all the margins in the entire circumference perfectly. So when you are doing your initial patients, it is definitely an extremely good idea to always have a transesophageal echocardiogram, which means sometimes all these patients may have to be intubated. The reason is we have to keep the patient comfortable as well. So if you look back about my experience of ASD device closure, I would probably say my almost first 1,000 cases of ASD device closure, I would have resorted to intraprocedural transesophageal echocardiography in almost 80 to 90% of the patients. Now, if you look at the last 1,000 patients, it would have been in about 1% of the patients. It's very rarely done. Even in patients whom we do something like a large 46 millimeter device, sometimes we may not put in. The reason is we now have an improving better and better understanding. Of course, all these patients will have a pre-procedural transesophageal echocardiogram in the outpatient clinic for a patient selection and the device selection. But intraprocedurally, the need for a transesophageal echocardiography is very often now not followed. It's rare, except if I am associating a procedure like we have done about 5 patients with ASD and left atrial appendage device closure, where we have done it. Patients who very rare, it's not very common at all. Now, I would say last 4 to 5 years, the amount of transesophageal echocardiography during an ASD device closure is virtually sort of given off. Now we try to make it minimalistic. Even if you look at the TAVR procedures nowadays, about when the TAVR was introduced, the first about close to about 2 to 3 years, it was mandatory to do a transesophageal echocardiographic guidance, complete monitoring of the patient, have the patient preferably intubated. Now it is minimalistic. You try to keep the patient on very subtle sedation, keep talking to the patient as you are doing, because like you try to create more and more comfort. But I would advise, it is a good idea to have a transesophageal echocardiographic guidance for your first maybe up to 800 to 1,000 cases, so that you get a good control over the procedure. And then once you have have a good grip over the procedure, then you slowly become minimalistic. That's why I told previously we used to do balloon assisted technique for large ASDs routinely. Whenever you used a 38 millimeter, 40 millimeter, it was a balloon assisted technique. But that means it is too groin approach. The patient next day morning will come and very sorrowfully ask you, sir, you have punctured both my groin. So it will be like he is telling you, you have almost done a sternotomy for me. So nowadays we tend to avoid, like last many years, we are not doing a balloon assisted technique at all. So go more and more minimalistic as your experience improves and you become more and more comfortable with the procedure. It's of course the same with any procedure. A person who is routinely doing a bifurcation stenting will have a different method, and if the first 50 bifurcation stenting will be different from the 100 to 200 bifurcation stenting. So it's any procedure wherein you gain more and more experience, then you sort of change your practice.
And sir, and one more, sir, last one. Sir, in our lab, we don't have that elliptical balloon which you showed for a balloon assisted device closure, sir.
Actually, I told the good balloon is a spherical balloon. It's called Equalizer. It is available from the Boston Scientific Corporation. It doesn't cost too much. I think it is costing somewhere around 7,000 to 8,000 rupees. It's a latex balloon. So it's quite spherical in its size. It's for balloon assistance. It's a very, very, very useful balloon. The advantage of this particular balloon is that it is very simple in its design. And if you have a practice of ethylene oxide sterilization in your cath lab, if it is acceptable, this balloon is easy to sterilize. And you can use it very comfortably for up to 7 to 8 times. However, if you are not using an ETO product at all as a policy in your institution, still it's not too expensive. It costs you less than 10,000 rupees, and so very minimally increases the cost of the procedure. Only problem is it needs another groin access, and so you will be puncturing the left femoral vein as well. That's all. Otherwise, it's a good balloon. If you don't have an if you don't have an equalizer balloon from the Boston Scientific, the other balloons are, if you are doing aortic aneurysm stent grafts, the Cook has got a balloon called a CODA balloon, and that is also another balloon that can be used. It's also a spherical balloon. So this is yet another. And then the third one is Medtronic has got another stent graft balloon. I'm just not getting the name of that balloon. It's another spherical balloon. So these are all some of the spherical
Atlas
balloons.
balloon.
Huh?
Atlas balloons.
No. Atlas is a very high profile balloon. It's very slow to deflate and inflate. Don't use Atlas. CODA, CODA from Cook, or Equalizer from the Boston Scientific. Both are freely available in Chennai.
Maniram sir, do you have any questions for sir? I think you're muted.
I'm sorry. Thank you, sir. It was an excellent presentation, sir. One point which I would like to tell all the participants, especially one thing we should learn from Shivakumar sir is it's not just about doing the procedure alone. He will have a very good follow-up of all the unusual procedures he has, so that they will have good data about the safety of the procedure. And you can learn from his talks very well that he has learned from every single procedure which he has done, which is what has probably set him apart from any other interventional cardiologist. And that is something which we have to learn. It's not just about doing the procedure. It's about making sure that we do the right thing to the patient, I think. And that is one thing which I think I've learned from a lot of sir's presentations as well. Sir, just one subset which is slightly unusual and which I'm sure you have a lot of experience. These are infants less than 1 year who have moderate to large ASD and who also have an unusual degree of pulmonary hypertension. Sometimes have even suppressed. What you do in these subsets, sir?
Okay. Dr. Maniram, I just wanted to make it clear. When you were talking to me now, your voice was getting broken. Is the same thing happened to my voice also?
No, sir. No. Your voice is clear, sir.
Okay. To all the participants, am I very clear without any audio disturbance?
Yes, sir. You are very clear, sir.
Okay. Now I will take up this particular subset. Since Maniram is the only pediatric person, I didn't take up the ASD in infancy. I took up the ASD in elderly. But now I will talk about a small amount about this ASD in infancy. We will now start an ASD from the fetus onwards. In the fetus, the right ventricle and left ventricle both are hypertrophied. The right ventricle and left ventricle both have elevated end diastolic pressure. The right ventricle and left ventricle, if you have the inflow velocities Dopplered, they will have small e, tall a, thick ventricles. The moment the baby is born, the baby starts to breathe, which expands the lungs and reduces the pulmonary vascular resistance. So when the pulmonary vascular resistance drops, previously in the fetal life, the blood flow was from the right atrium to left atrium, and now the flow reverses from left atrium to right atrium. There is this left to right atrial shunt, even though the PVR is falling, is not transmitted significantly because the right ventricle continues to be hypertrophied. So this continued hypertrophy of the right ventricle prevents an establishment of a left to right shunt. So the right ventricular volume overload does not happen to a substantial degree in the first 1 year of life of a patient. In the first 1 year, what happens is the relative thicker right ventricle will prevent establishment of a large shunt, and a large number of these patients do not establish a left-right shunt at all. So it won't be surprising if you have a newborn baby where you go and auscultate the patient's chest, you won't hear a murmur at all. But as the child grows to 6 months or 1 year, slowly the flow murmurs get established, which means the left-right shunt takes time to establish. So that is the reason why majority of these patients do not get symptomatic. But let us assume two things are happening. Number one, the progressive fall in the pulmonary vascular resistance, which is supposed to happen in every newborn baby with age, is not happening proportionately. So what happens in these patients? The pulmonary artery pressure is at a marginally higher level than a normal infant. Number two, the right ventricle, I told, is thicker, and the right ventricle was tuned to pump at a higher pressure in the fetal life. But now in the postnatal period, when there is a slightly higher right ventricular volume overload, if this right ventricle is not having the ability to tolerate that additional volume overload, the right ventricle fails. There are two reasons for right ventricular failure in a small infant. One, inherent myocardial characteristics of the right ventricle, which does not allow the right ventricle to accommodate that increasing volume overload. Number two, the pulmonary arteriolar vascular resistance, which normally reduces in every fetus into the postnatal period transition, is not happening to a proportionate degree. So these particular subset of patients will have a combination of some degree of pulmonary hypertension and some degree of right ventricular systolic dysfunction that results in elevation of the RA pressure, and they have features of heart failure. They will have congested inferior vena cava, they will have elevated JVP, they will have liver being enlarged, they will fail in their growth, they will have frequent respiratory infections, and these proportion will have significant features of heart failure. So in these patients, when you try to catheterize them, often you will find that the PA pressures will be 50 to 70 millimeters of mercury against an aortic pressure of 80 to 90, which means almost to the level of moderate PAH. Maniram briefly told that sometimes there may be suprasystemic. It is often not, it doesn't go to that level, because in the fetal life, PA and aortic pressures are same. And in every fetus after the baby is born, PA pressure tends to fall. It definitely falls. But the only thing is, it does not fall to normalcy. Normally, it should fall from the fetal levels of around 60 to 70 millimeters of mercury to absolutely normal levels of 20 to 25. But it does not happen in them. So very often it will be subsystemic, but it will not fall to normal level. So you will find that most of them will have a moderate level of pulmonary hypertension. These patients on table, if you give them oxygen, they will melt their PA pressures, which means from 60s, they will drop down to 30s instantaneously, and the shunt will become torrential. So this is a small subset of patients. This happens in only about 5 to 8% of secondary atrial septal defects and early infantile heart failure presentation. Most of them will have substantial growth failure. Apical four-chamber view of the heart will show hugely dilated RA and RV, poorly contractile right ventricle, and they will have IVC congestion. They will very often need drugs like digoxin, diuretics in their early infancy. And these patients are preferably sent for closure of the ASD. Now, the decision on whether it is for a transcatheter closure or surgical closure will depend on how safely you will be able to do the procedure in the cath lab versus on surgery. It's often a safer subset to go into surgery where you give off the patient to a surgeon, where he will go on cardiopulmonary bypass and do it. But if the margins are clearly acceptable, it is good idea to take them for catheter closure. The reason why I want to take them up for a catheter closure as my preferred option will be, I will be able to assess the basic hemodynamics, calculate the PVRI, I'll be able to assess what is the effect on oxygen, calculate the PVRI on oxygen, then close the ASD and do the third PA pressure after closure of the ASD. And if after closure of the ASD, if the PA pressure is high, continue them on some pulmonary vasodilator for a reasonable period of time, prime them about a need for a repeat cardiac catheterization at the end of 1 year or 2 years, and reassess them and try to find whether these patients will have an element of pulmonary vascular disease set in them which will need a long-term pulmonary vasodilator therapy, or in a majority of the patients, there will be a substantial improvement of heart failure and PAH, that by the end of about 1 year, you may be able to withdraw majority of these medications. The advantage of doing a catheterization-based closure is that you will have pre-closure data, oxygen data, post-closure data, and these patients will definitely come for a follow-up cardiac catheterization as well. When you are doing everything by surgery, you have only echocardiogram to believe on what is the pulmonary artery pressure, and majority of the times it will be a relative guess only. Because once the tricuspid regurgitation disappears, then you will not be able to assess the PA pressures very precisely, and then you will be based on some sort of judgment calls, you will be treating them subsequently. So there are a small number of patients where we have taken up infants who are like 5 kilograms, 6 kilograms, 7 kilograms with heart failure, with moderate pulmonary hypertension for catheter closure. And we are keeping them on close monitoring post-procedure with varieties of medication. If I find that there is more and more of ventricular dysfunction in these patients, they may be treated with more of beta blockers. If the patient is having more and more of pulmonary vascular resistance and PAH, they'll be more on bosentan or sildenafil. So depending on what is the primary hemodynamic abnormality, if the right atrial pressure is substantially elevated, there will be more on diuretics. If the right atrial pressure is near normal, they will be taken off the diuretics. So you treat whether it is a systemic venous congestion, whether it is a ventricular dysfunction, whether it is a pulmonary arterial hypertension, with targeted therapy in each case. It's a small subset, only 5 to 8%, and that is due to a combination of right ventricle not able to take the volume overload, which every right ventricle is usually capable of taking. In majority of the patients with ASD, they are capable of taking. The second thing is the proportion, the rapidity of fall of the pulmonary vascular resistance in the fetus towards the postnatal period is delayed in this particular subset of patients.
There's one question in the chat box, sir, whether you think subclavian vein or axillary vein can replace a femoral approach in the future.
Okay. Now, the advantage of a femoral vein towards an atrial septum is that the femoral vein is in direct perpendicular alignment to the atrial septum. In fetus, how the blood goes into the from the right atrium to the left atrium. It enters through the umbilical vein, enters the portal vein, through the ductus venosus, enters the hepatic vein, inferior vena cava, and from inferior vena cava, it is shunted towards the atrial septum into the left atrium. So it is in direct alignment. So femoral vein will be the preferred approach. But a very small minority of patients will not have a femoral venous patency because of IVC interruption. There will be an IVC interruption with an azygous continuation of the inferior vena cava. These patients are not suitable. Then there will be a second group of patients who had a lot of instrumentation in their early childhood or due to in the region of femoral veins by some sort of neonatal prolonged sepsis and neonatal prolonged femoral venous cannulation. They may have closed up femoral veins. In them, jugular may be appropriate. And the third group of patients will be patients who have inferior vena caval or femoral venous thrombosis in the setting of adults with deep vein thrombosis, who are getting recurrent paradoxical embolism, and in them, if you want to close, again, it may be preferable to come from the jugular vein and prevent further and further embolization by using an IVC filter on the lower inferior vena cava.
One more question on the chat box, sir. What is your approach to patients who have ASD and more than mild mitral regurgitation?
Yes. There are two reasons for a atrial septal defect patient to have a mitral regurgitation. Whenever there is an atrial septal defect, left atrium is decompressed into the right atrium. So the left ventricular inflow is inadequate. Left ventricle does not get filled. Left ventricle is small in its size. But the mitral valve is structurally formed normally. So there is a ventriculo-valvar mismatch. A normal sized mitral valve and a normal sized mitral valve leaflets is now entering into a left ventricle which is not inadequate, which is not adequately filling. So small left ventricle with a normal sized mitral valve leaflets. So this is called ventriculo-valvar mismatch. When this ventricle closes, the mitral valve prolapses out because the mitral valve does not have space within the left ventricles. If you know that it is a sort of a bileaflet prolapse of a mild to moderate degree, which is causing a mitral regurgitation, a large majority of these patients will improve after the ASD device closure or ASD surgical closure, because you are now driving more volume into the left ventricle. And so you are reversing the ventriculovalvular mismatch into a ventriculovalvular match. So the ventricle will become appropriately large, and this will prevent the prolapse of the mitral valve leaflet. So the way in which we assess these patients are, look at the mitral valve's adequacy. If the mitral valve leaflets are all well formed, but the left ventricular cavity is relatively smaller, these patients will improve. But if there is a structural abnormality of the mitral valve, there is marked degrees of prolapse, too much of myxomatous tissues, like there are some ruptured chordae, then in those patients, it may be preferable to get mitral valve repair surgery along with ASD closure. So you look at the mitral valve morphology and be aware about the condition called ventriculovalvular mismatch caused by a smaller left ventricle with a normal sized mitral valve, which results in prolapse of the leaflets into the left atrium in mid and late systole.
There are no other questions in the chat box, sir. Yes, is there any?
I think Ganesh is also there. Ganesh.
There is a question from Anand Subramaniam about what problems are expected in large ASD closures, especially more than 38 millimeters. Let us talk about the theoretical complications. Any device has got a 14 millimeter larger left atrial disc up to a size of 38 millimeter. The moment it is more than 40 millimeter, the left atrial disc is 16 millimeter larger than the waist. So let us talk about a 42 millimeter device. It is 42 plus 16, which is 58 millimeters. I spoke about 48 millimeter device. That was the largest that we have done. A 48 millimeter device will have a 64 millimeter left atrial disc. So when there is a large left atrial disc, our theoretical assumption will be a delayed endothelialization, which may result in more thrombus formation on the left atrial side of the device. So it may be justified to keep them on prolonged antiplatelet agents for a long period of time, number one. Number two, whenever there is a large device, one of the concern will be whether it might erode through the heart. We need to make a judgment that the device should be proportionate to the defect size. So if there is a defect that is 42 millimeter, and if you are putting a 48 millimeter device, that is appropriate. You should not oversize unnecessarily. And it is the oversized device that causes erosion and not an appropriate sized device. This is issue number two. Majority of the patients with such a large ASD are often quite elderly. These are patients who will have the atrial size of 60 to 70 millimeters already. So these patients are prone for atrial fibrillation. So you should have a good surveillance of these patients to look at their ECGs meticulously, warn them about palpitations, and if there is a palpitation, immediately get an ECG or a Holter and document whether they are getting paroxysmal atrial fibrillations. And if they are getting it, then appropriately treat them either with drug control strategy like amiodarone beta blockers, or with rate control strategies like digoxin and putting them on anticoagulation. So ensure that their thromboembolism is taken care of. Ensure that a delayed endothelialization is taken care of. Ensure that you are putting an appropriate size device, that you are not creating a chance of erosion, and these devices are reasonably safe. This is what we published recently in our cardiac catheterization and cardiovascular interventions, our experience on 48 patients with 40, 42, 44, 46 millimeter devices. We have found actually a reasonable safety in these patients. This was published about 1.5 years ago in CCI. Anand Subramaniam, is he the doctor from Bangalore?
No, he is from our hospital. He's from Trichy. Kaveri.
Okay. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, there was an Anand Subramaniam in Trichy. Yeah, remember. Yeah. I'm seeing Dr. Marimuthu also is muted, but good to see you, sir.
Ganesh, you have any question? You are part of the
Sir, I have one question, sir. Sir, can you throw some light on how the left atrial function in the long term after patients who are undergoing either surgical or device closure?
Actually, Ganesh, we have not done such meticulous left atrial volume assessment, function assessment, and all. But what we follow in them is in their routine post-operative, post-procedural echocardiography, we always look at the mitral valve Doppler and ensure that there is a good atrial kick. This actually gives us a confirmation that the left atrium is functioning, the patient is having a sinus rhythm, and there is no need for an anticoagulation. We in fact have not done such a fine functional work on the left atrial functions and all. So I am unfortunately I am not able to give you more information on it. We don't anticipate any substantial change in the left atrial function. The problem is dilatation of the atria, which predisposes them to have paroxysmal atrial fibrillations, and this is what is of concern in the elderly. Maybe a good idea to look at the left atrial function. We have not looked at it. But always I ensure that I look at the EA and confirm that there is an A wave in every patient. If I see an A wave, I'm happy. That means there is no need for anticoagulation.
Sir, I recently had a patient in my OPD. He's a 65-year-old male, was totally asymptomatic. He went for a regular checkup and they found out that he was having a 18 millimeter ASD. There was an RA-RB dilatation, but his PA pressures are totally normal. So he has never had any atrial fibrillations before. He is totally asymptomatic. In these kind of patients, what should be the ideal strategy for them, and how to go about, sir?
Yeah. So basically, whenever they are completely asymptomatic, then we also will have a lots of hesitation in taking them up for any sort of intervention. The first thing that we should try to see in them is, sometimes some of them will say that they are quite asymptomatic, but you look at the chest X-ray, it will be 75% heart. So the CTR will be massive. So in such patients, we will know that the patient is not able to identify that he is having an effort intolerance. You just put them on a very limited treadmill. And if they start gasping at the end of stage 1 or beginning of stage 2 Bruce protocol, that means they are substantially symptomatic, but they are not aware about their symptoms. It has been a chronic disease. So right from their early adulthood, they would have been effort limited. And so what they will feel is walking 100 meters itself comfortably is good enough for their lifetime. So sometimes you may be able to expose their effort intolerance by doing a very limited symptom assessment test, like making them climb a staircase or making them walk on a treadmill to very low levels of effort tolerance. And chest X-ray is yet another clue that I often use to find out if there is a very large heart. Any heart that is more than 60% CTR on a erect PA view in a good inspiratory film, I feel that these patients are symptomatic. The third reason is these patients will remain asymptomatic as long as they are not having an atrial arrhythmia. They have to be tilted with one episode of atrial fibrillation. And you can predict an atrial fibrillation in them by looking at their ECG. And if there are frequent atrial ectopics that are coming, that's a harbinger of atrial fibrillation. You look at their 4-chamber view, and if the atrial size is more than 6 to 6.5 centimeter, they are prone for atrial fibrillation. And in these patients, inform them that be aware about paroxysmal palpitations that might come. And if you have a palpitation, it may be a good idea to close it off. A patient with large ASD and an atrial fibrillation will be difficult to manage if they have a patent left-right shunt. But if they have a closed left-right shunt, it is easier to manage. So my threshold on taking up a patient who is relatively elderly for an ASD device closure, like I will immediately accept if there is cardiomegaly on the chest X-ray, if there is effort intolerance that is documented on limited treadmill. We don't tell them to go to stage 3, stage 4 and all. Like if they are able to complete a stage 2 Bruce, that's good enough. That means a 65-year-old man is able to walk reasonably well. But if they are not able to perform even at very low effort loads, then these are patients which will take. Of course, other things can be a mild degree of pedal edema, IVC congestion, JVP elevation. All these will tell us that these patients are actually having hemodynamic effects of ASD, but they are not aware about what is there. It's very difficult. Unlike a myocardial infarction or an angina, which is a new onset symptom, a 30-year-old person going on to 65 years with the same ASD, he will not understand what is the effort tolerance, he will accept the low effort tolerance as the usual norm for him. There is another question by Anand, whether right upper pulmonary vein obstruction is possible. We have never seen a pulmonary vein obstruction with devices at all.
I have one more question, sir. Are you still encountering nitinol related allergy, or how do you consider dual antiplatelet therapy still valid today?
Yeah. I have only 2 patients where we suspected that there may be a nitinol allergy, because 2 patients, both of them were in their adolescent and early adult ladies, had lots and lots of skin urticaria after the device closures, unexplained. And in them, in fact, I challenged them with asking them to buy some of the nickel ear studs and all, and I told them to put ear stud on one side and gold stud on the other side and try to see whether there is a skin reaction on that side. We were not able to demonstrate a cutaneous nickel allergy, but these patients had some unexplained urticarias again and again. So for them, we had to give some prolonged antihistamines. Of course, we did not resort to removal of the device. It got settled after 3 to 4 months. The second aspect of nickel allergy that is being suspected is some of the patients who develop a left atrial thrombus formation after a device closure. I have 2 patients who had a left atrial thrombus formation after a device closure. One was incidentally detected on a routine transesophageal echocardiography. I do sometimes a routine transesophageal echo in a large ASD just to see how the left atrial surface is at the end of 3 to 6 months. And in them, one of the cases we picked up. Another patient had a transient ischemic attack, and we did a TE, and we found a small mass near the left atrial hub of the device. In these patients are also sometimes considered to be a possible nickel inflammation, with the inflammation leading to thrombus formation. They're suspected. We have never seen a much more serious sort of allergy, 2 with urticaria and 2 with thrombus formation. So I am not aware about a very substantial nickel allergy after device closure. Some of the things that has happened with the devices are the LifeTech is actually nano coating the nickel the nitinol devices with the titanium nitride, and Occlutech is nano coating them with titanium oxide. If you had been doing Amplatzer devices for a long number of years, you would have seen way back in the 1998, 1999 and all, the device used to have something like a grayish color. Then in the late 2000s, it sort of had a bluish color. The bluish color was again a nano coating with a titanium nitride. So what every company now is doing is they are doing some sort of a nano coating on the surface of the nitinol to prevent the nickel leaching. So right now, the incidence of nickel leaching and the nickel allergy is possibly extremely minimal. We also should be aware that a large numbers of vascular stent grafts made of nitinol are also available, which has got large vascular surface area, and they are pretty safe. They don't lead to nickel leaching and nickel related allergy. So nickel allergy is more theoretical rather than practical.
So what is the status of antiplatelet therapy usage nowadays, sir? What is the protocol?
All the patients will definitely have 6 months of aspirin. Large devices will definitely have dual antiplatelets, aspirin plus Plavix or aspirin plus clopidogrel in any form. Patients who have had a previous episodes of atrial fibrillation will be monitored on table whether they are having atrial fibrillation, and if they are only in sinus rhythm, they will be given only aspirin and clopidogrel. But if during the procedure, if they get paroxysmal episodes of atrial fibrillation, we will convert them with amiodarone, but give them warfarin also. I keep them on warfarin and withdraw the warfarin at the end of 3 to 6 months if they have consistently demonstrated sinus rhythm. At any point of time in future, if they have any episodes of atrial fibrillation, I go for a rhythm control strategy, which means trying them with amiodarone to convert them back into sinus rhythm, but parallelly give them warfarin. I have more experience with warfarin than with the NOAC, because the age at which I started practicing, warfarin was freely available rather than NOAC. And so more number of patients of mine who had atrial fibrillations were on warfarin rather than the newer dabigatran or rivaroxaban or any of these newer drugs.
How do you adjust dosage of clopidogrel for children, sir? Last question.
It is what is recommended in the West for clopidogrel is 0.2 milligram per kilogram per day. But in India, what we follow is 1 to 2 milligram per kilogram per day. Much higher than the doses that is recommended in the regular pediatric forum of the Western literature. If you look at our own adult cardiology practice, while the West was giving Plavix 75 milligram once a day as the antiplatelet in USA, Indian cardiologists who are doing in those days were giving clopidogrel twice a day, or any form of our own clopidogrel twice a day. So basically, what we had an inherent fear within ourselves that our clopidogrel has some form of reduced bioavailability compared to the Plavix. Some sort of this mental process has started way back. And now even when you have changed over to drugs like ticagrelor, and then later when you are shifting back to clopidogrel, a fair number of cardiologists still practice twice a day clopidogrel if you know that the drug-eluting stent is having a slightly higher risk of stent thrombosis. Somehow we have also incorporated the same practice. We tend to give 1 to 2 milligram per kilogram clopidogrel per kilogram per day for most of the younger patients. The common indication for clopidogrel in a younger patient in my practice is neonatal ductal stenting for various forms of pulmonary atresia, where we put in a drug-eluting ductal stent in newborns, and these patients are given 1 to 2 milligram per kilogram clopidogrel per day. So we just extrapolate the same thing to children of say 2 years, 3 years, 4 years.
Shivakumar, why do you prefer warfarin over acitram?
Sir, just in my first 15 years, only warfarin was available, and that was our standard practice. The NOAC came in the last maybe 5 years.
I'm not talking about NOAC, acitram.
Oh, fine, sir. Both. Actually, my practice is like this. If the warfarin dose is increasing more than 5 milligram, then I try to prefer acitram. Acitram, the rough dosage of, for example, if a patient is needing warfarin 5 milligram, then usual dose of acitram will be 2 or 3 milligram. So it is like I always start with warfarin, but if the patient's need for warfarin goes to 8, 9, 10 and all, then I switch over to acitram. Otherwise, yeah, usually I give warfarin. I don't
Are there any specific advantage?
No, sir. No, nothing. I don't think there is any specific advantage, but practice plan, the practice that I have been following is starting, of course, give the heparin on table when they are having atrial fibrillation and bridge them over with warfarin. Nothing specific. We can give acitram as well. Definitely, it can be done.
As on date, cost-wise, is it in par with the surgical closure, or it is cheaper or higher?
Okay, sir. Actually, in my hospital, an ASD device closure will cost somewhere to the tune of 2 lakhs. It's quite expensive. My surgery cost in my hospital is 230,000. I would say, I'm not sure, but probably Madras Medical Mission is marginally more expensive than the peripheral parts of Tamil Nadu. The reason may be because we have got a very, very, very large manpower. My pediatric cardiology department has got about 14 doctors. And the adult cardiology has got close to about 22, 23 doctors. So maybe the packages are marginally higher in my institution than in many other institutions at your district or the neighboring districts. It's possible. But yeah, device is about 85% of the cost of surgery in my hospital. There may be some premium charges charged by the hospital administration. We don't have a control over those things, sir.
If the patient is having insurance cover, means the cost will become more.
Insurance cover means it will be covered by the insurance. I'm not getting the cost is the same for everybody, sir.
No. Will it be escalated?
No. No, it's the same. Those things are good in this hospital. Actually, it's very, very streamlined, and it is not a differential package depending on the patient. It's far more quite rigid. In everybody will have the same. In fact, foreign patient will also get the same cost. The patient who is coming from Singapore will also get at the same 200,000 and go off. no differential package for anybody, depending on the place where they are coming from.
Is there anything special with your denture, Sir Kumar?
The advantage of the recommendation for a post ASD device closure is 6 months. We should have an infective endocarditis prophylaxis if there is any need for an invasive dental therapy. And if beyond 6 months, it is assumed that majority of these patients will have a complete endothelialization. There is no need for any endocarditis prophylaxis subsequently. In my entire experience, I have had only one episode of infective endocarditis in a patient who had an ASD, who incidentally also had a TBX5 mutation and a congenital complete heart block. So this patient had an ASD device closure plus a pacemaker implantation, both together at the same time. The procedure was relatively prolonged because it was a combined procedure of ASD from bottom and a pacemaker from the top. Possibly the patient developed a staphylococcal infective endocarditis 3rd month after the procedure, might be related to the prolonged procedure. I had to do a lead extraction of this patient to take out the entire pacemaker because the entire lead was filled with vegetations, but left the ASD as such because the vegetations were more and more on the lead rather than on the device. The patient is now on follow-up 2.5 years after the lead extraction, continues to remain in complete heart block with a ventricular rate of somewhere around 50, not having much of heart failure, but the device is in place. Endocarditis is fully cured now. This was the only patient where I had infective endocarditis in association with an ASD device. Otherwise, we never had a ASD device directly related endocarditis. Was your question on dentures related to infective endocarditis, sir? I don't know whether I was missing your real question and going somewhere else. Not getting an answer. Dr. Murugesan sir is still there? Am I audible?
You're audible. I think, sir, connection got lost, I believe.
No problem. That's fine. I don't know whether he meant
Suraj,
something else.
Ganesh, you can find up if there is no more question.
Sir, I think there are no more questions. It was a wonderful talk by Dr. Shivakumar sir, and he has answered all our questions so nicely, starting from the basics to the top. So I'd like to conclude the section and hand over to Dr. Arvind Kumar sir for further proceedings.
Nothing, sir. It was great of you to come and talk to in our forum, sir. It was fantastic, and so much of basics were taught from basics to this extreme, that to the other extreme. It was fantastic to hear you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Looking forward for further other device closure also in future dates, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
I'm very happy to see all of you from Trichy, Tanjavur, Pudukkottai, and I am not able to identify people from other places. And I wish you all the very best and stay safe. And I'll be happy to interact with you at any point, like for any patient related or any time. You all can always call me and talk to me. Thanks a lot for this opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sir Kumar.